Imagine this, the world's two superpowers are locked in a trade war that's not just costing billions, it's reshaping the global food chain, and Europe could be the unintended victim. What if cheap American soybeans flooding your markets today spell economic handcuffs tomorrow? Welcome to the latest twist in the US-China showdown. Let's break down what's really going on. Tensions between Washington and Beijing have escalated dramatically in 2025, with President Trump's administration slapping an additional 100% tariff on Chinese goods set to kick in on November 1st. In retaliation, China has completely halted imports of U.S. soybeans, a move that's left American farmers staring at mountains of unsold crops. This isn't a minor blip. China was once the biggest bear of U.S. soybeans, snapping up billions worth annually. But in 2025, exports from the U.S. to China have plummeted from 10 billion euros in 2024 to zero. Chinese importers haven't touched U.S. soybeans from the autumn harvest for the first time in over 20 years, forcing farmers in the Midwest, Trump's heartland base, to scramble for new markets or let their harvests rot in storage. To understand the stakes, consider the numbers. Global soybean production is massive, with China gobbling up 60% of it to feed its booming livestock sector. In September alone, China's soybean imports hit near-record levels, but none came from the U.S. Instead, they've surged from Brazil and Argentina, securing their supply while punishing American growers. U.S. exports to China from January to August 2025 totaled just 218 million bushels, with zero deliveries in June, July, or August. Retaliatory tariffs have jacked up the effective duty on U.S. soybeans in China to 34%, combining 20% punitive tariffs with VAT and other taxes. And now, with port fees imposed by both sides taking effect on October 14th, the trade war has opened a new front, making shipping even costlier. This standoff echoes the 2018 trade war, when China first targeted U.S. soybeans in response to steel tariffs, diverting purchases to South America. Back then, Europe stepped in as a bear of last resort, and history is repeating itself. Under a new trade framework agreement with Washington, the EU has committed to boosting imports of American soybeans, positioning the bloc to absorb the U.S. surplus. Between July 2024 and June 2025, the EU imported 14.5 million tons of soybeans and 21.1 million tons of soybean meal, mostly from the US and Brazil, for its livestock feed needs. With China's doors slammed shut, U.S. soybeans are now flooding Europe at bargain prices, offering short-term relief to European farmers and meat producers who rely on soy to keep costs down. But here's what the media won't tell you. This bargain basement deal is a double-edged sword. Europe's livestock industry is hooked on imported soy. French researcher Olivier Antoine puts it bluntly: Europe's meat consumption simply wouldn't exist without soy. Post-World War II, the continent built its meat-heavy diet on cheap imports from the US, then Brazil, fueling massive growth in pork, poultry, and dairy. Today, domestic production is woefully inadequate. In France, soybean yields average just 1 ton per hectare compared to 3.5 tons in Brazil. Cheap U.S. inflows could undercut local growers even further, stifling any push toward self-sufficiency. The real danger lies in Europe's deepening structural dependence on a handful of exporters: the U.S., Brazil, and Argentina. Antoine warns that while the short-term gains from discounted U.S. supplies are tempting, they can become a bad move in the long run, locking the EU into vulnerability. Unlike China, which has turned its soy needs into geopolitical leverage by investing in Latin American supply chains through the new Silk Roads, penetrating key companies and diversifying sources. Europe imports mostly processed soybean meal, capturing zero added value like jobs or processing profits. Antoine notes Europe wants to be a normative power and impose its laws, but it has no influence over production or the architecture of the soybean system. its only tool, deciding whether to buy or not a weak position in a world where Beijing can simply say no to the U.S. and pivot elsewhere. This isn't just another headline, it's a wake-up call for global trade fragility. U.S. farmers are panicking, with some warning of a bloodbath as they store unsold beans and beg for government aid. Trump has floated relief packages, but with midterms looming in 2026, this hits his MAGA base hard. Meanwhile, China's strategy is paying off. By halting U.S. imports, they've not only hurt American agriculture, but boosted Brazil's dominance, where yields and investments give them an edge. For Europe, the influx means lower feed costs now, potentially stabilizing meat prices amid inflation pressures. But geopolitically, it exposes the bloc to shocks like weather events in Brazil or further U.S.-China escalations that could spike prices overnight. Zooming out, this soybean saga underscores broader economic shifts. The U.S.-China trade war, now including port fees and rare earth probes, is fragmenting supply chains worldwide. Canada, watching from the sidelines, could feel ripples to its canola exports to China have faced similar barriers in past disputes, and with soy as a substitute feed, Ottawa might see opportunities or threats in redirected trade flows. Globally, this pushes nations toward diversification, but for the EU, stuck importing 95% of its soy needs, the path to resilience is steep. In the end, China's soybean snub isn't just punishing U.S. farmers, it's a masterclass in turning dependence into power, while Europe risks becoming a passive player in someone else's game. Short-term cheap supplies might feel like a win, but they could chain the bloc to volatile exporters for decades, my prediction. If the EU doesn't invest in domestic alternatives or forge new deals like expanding ties with Ukraine or finalizing the EU-Mercosur pact with Argentina, it'll pay dearly when the next crisis hits. This trade war isn't ending soon, and the real losers might not be in Beijing or Washington, but in Brussels. Think about that. In a world of weaponized trade, is your dinner table secure?